There is a reign on earth that is so dangerous, so tense, that millions of soldiers stood ready on both sides. A reign where two nuclear powers glare at each other across barbed wire. A reign born in chaos and drawn in just 5 weeks by a man who had never even seen the land he was dividing. This reign created the modern states of India and Pakistan, but it also unleashed one of the largest migrations in human history. Millions fled, hundreds of thousands died, cities burned, and the consequences of that reign still shape global politics today. Because what began as a rushed colonial decision in 1947 has now become one of the most dangerous rivalries on earth. This is a story of the border that created two nuclear enemies. For nearly 2 centuries, the British controlled one of the largest empires in history. At its heart was British Empire, rule over the Indian subcontinent. This territory was known as British India, and it was enormous. It included not only modern India, but also Pakistan and Bangladesh. Nearly 400 million people lived there. It was the most valuable colony Britain possessed. But by the early 20th century, British control was weakening, nationalist movements were growing, and two political visions for the future of the region were emerging. One was led by Mahatma Gandhi and the Indian National Congress, who imagined a united, independent India. The other was led by Muhammad Ali Jinnah and the All India Muslim League, who feared that Muslims would become a minority in a Hindu-majority nation. Their solution was radical: create a separate Muslim homeland, a new country called Pakistan. Two visions, one land, and by the 1940s, compromise was collapsing. After the devastation of World War II, Britain was exhausted. The empire was too expensive to maintain, and in 1947, London made a dramatic decision. It would leave India, but instead of one country gaining independence, the subcontinent would be split into two. The moment became known as the Partition of India. The idea seemed simple on paper. Muslim-majority areas would become Pakistan. Hindu-majority areas would become India. But there was one enormous problem. Nobody knew exactly where the border should go, and time was running out. To solve this problem, Britain appointed a man named Sir Radcliffe. Radcliffe was a British lawyer. He had never been to India. He had no experience with the region. Yet, he was given an almost impossible task: divide a continent. He had just 5 weeks. 5 weeks to decide the fate of hundreds of millions of people. Radcliffe worked using outdated maps, incomplete census data, and political pressure from both sides. His goal was to separate regions based largely on religion. But the population was deeply mixed. Cities, villages, and even neighborhoods contained both Muslims and Hindus. Drawing a clear line was impossible. Yet, a line had to be drawn. When Radcliffe finished, it became known as the Radcliffe Line, and on August 17, 1947, it was revealed to the world. The moment the border appeared, panic spread. Millions suddenly found themselves on the wrong side. Muslims in India feared persecution. Hindus and Sikhs in Pakistan feared the same. So they fled. Entire families abandoned their homes. Caravans of refugees stretched for miles. Trains packed with migrants crossed the new frontier. Historians estimate that around 14 million people moved during the chaos, and it was one of the largest migrations ever recorded. It was not peaceful. Violence exploded across the region. Communal riots erupted. Villages were attacked. Refugee convoys were massacred. By the time the violence ended, up to 1 million people were dead. The birth of two nations came at an enormous human cost. The new countries of India and Pakistan emerged from violence deeply suspicious of each other, and almost immediately a new crisis appeared. It is centered on a mountainous region in the Himalayas, a place called Kashmir. Kashmir was a state ruled by Hindu monarch, but most of its population was Muslim. When partition arrived, the ruler hesitated. He did not immediately join either country. That hesitation proved disastrous. In late 1947, fighting erupted between forces aligned with Pakistan and the ruler's government. The ruler asked India for military help. India agreed, but only if Kashmir joined India. The ruler signed the agreement. Indian troops moved in. Pakistan rejected the decision, and the first war between the two nations began. The conflict quickly escalated into the Indo-Pakistani War of 1947 to 1948. Both countries sent troops into the mountains. Battles raged across the valleys of Kashmir. Eventually, the United Nations stepped in. A ceasefire was declared in 1949, but the conflict was never fully resolved. Instead, Kashmir was divided. India controlled 2/3 of the territory. Pakistan controlled the rest. The dividing line became known as the Line of Control, and it remains one of the most heavily militarized borders on Earth. The Kashmir dispute did not fade. It erupted again in Indo-Pakistani War of 1965, and again during the Indo-Pakistani War of 1971. The 1971 war had dramatic consequences. It resulted in the independence of Bangladesh, which had previously been part of Pakistan. Each conflict deepened hostility, each war hardened the border, and each generation inherited the rivalry. For decades, the conflict remained regional, but in 1998, the stakes changed dramatically. Both countries tested nuclear weapons. First, India conducted the Pokhran-2 nuclear test. Soon after, Pakistan responded with the Chagai-1 nuclear test. Now the rivals possessed nuclear arsenals. The border drawn in 1947 had become a front line between two nuclear powers. Suddenly, a regional dispute carried global consequences. Despite the tension, one part of the border hosts a daily spectacle. At the Wagah border crossing, soldiers from both countries perform an elaborate military ceremony every evening. Crowds gather on both sides. Flags are lowered. Soldiers march aggressively toward each other in a carefully choreographed display. It looks theatrical, almost like a sporting rivalry, but behind the spectacle lies a very real conflict. Just a few hundred kilometers away in Kashmir, soldiers still face each other across mountains and barbed wire. The border between India and Pakistan is more than just a line. It is the legacy of colonial decision, the trauma of partition, and decades of war. It divides culture that once lived side by side. Families that were separated in 1947 still remain apart today, and the Kashmir dispute continues to flare up with occasional violence. Yet, despite everything, neither side is willing to give up its claim. The line drawn by Sir Radcliffe has become permanent, even though it was never meant to be. History is full of borders drawn by kings, emperors, and generals, but few have shaped the modern world like this one, a border drawn in 5 weeks that triggered the largest migration in history, sparked multiple wars, and turned two neighbors into nuclear rivals. It is a reminder that sometimes the most powerful forces in geopolitics are not mountains or rivers, but the lines humans draw on maps. And once those lines exist, they can shape the fate of nations for generations.